town of Willow Creek was the kind of place where time seemed to stand still. With a population of just under 2,000, everyone knew each other and nothing stayed secret for long. Kids grew up together, went to the same schools, played in the same parks, and shared their entire lives under the watchful eyes of their parents and neighbors. But that all changed one late autumn night, when Jenna Marshall, a well-loved high school senior, went for a walk and never came back. Jenna wasn't the type to run away. She had good grades, was captain of the soccer team, and had been dating her boyfriend Mark for almost 2 years. To anyone looking in from the outside, she had the perfect life. But those closest to her knew something had been troubling Jenna in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. She'd been distant, skipping practice and avoiding her friends. When asked about it, Jenna brushed it off, saying she was just stressed about college applications. But her eyes told a different story, one filled with fear. The night Jenna disappeared, she had stormed out of the house after a heated argument with her parents. They had grounded her for missing curfew the night before, but Jenna didn't care. She slammed the door and headed down the street, walking aimlessly as the cool autumn air chilled her to the bone. The moon was high, casting long shadows on the empty streets of Willow Creek. Unbeknownst to anyone, that would be the last time Jenna Marshall was seen. When her parents realized Jenna hadn't come home by morning, they called the police. A search was launched immediately, with dozens of volunteers scouring the town and surrounding woods. Her phone was found early on, lying on a bench near the old rickety bridge that led out of town. It was still powered on, with a single unsent text message glaring on the screen. "It's following me." The discovery chilled everyone to the core. The word "it" sent a ripple of fear through Willow Creek. Who or what was Jenna running from? The town had never experienced anything like this. There had been no reports of suspicious figures, no stalkers, no predators lurking in the shadows. But something about that message hinted at something far more sinister. Days turned into weeks, and the search for Jenna began to lose steam. No body was found. No clues were left behind, except for strange, unsettling signs that kept appearing in the places she had frequented. First, her favorite bracelet was found at the edge of the forest, the same one she wore every day without fail. Then a torn page from an old diary, Jenna's diary, was discovered tucked into the door of the local diner where she worked. The page was dated 3 weeks before her disappearance and contained only one sentence: "I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched." Rumors spread like wildfire. Some believed Jenna had been kidnapped, taken by someone she knew. Others whispered darker theories. The town's old legends about spirits haunting the nearby woods resurfaced. Stories about people being taken by something that lived in the forest. The legend of the Shadow Watcher, a figure said to have once stalked Willow Creek's outskirts, was suddenly being talked about again, as if the past had reached out to claim one of its own. Mark, Jenna's boyfriend, was especially distraught. He organized search parties, refusing to give up hope. But the more time passed, the more desperate and erratic he became. He started claiming he could feel Jenna's presence, that she was still alive but trapped somewhere just out of reach. "I hear her voice at night," he told his friends, eyes wide with fear. "She's calling for help." As the weeks stretched into months, strange occurrences began to plague the town. Muddy footprints appeared on the Marshall family's doorstep every night, leading toward the woods but stopping abruptly at the edge of town, as if whoever or whatever made them had vanished into thin air. People began reporting sightings of a shadowy figure lurking in the trees at dusk, always too far away to make out clearly, but close enough to send a shiver down their spines. One evening, nearly 6 months after Jenna's disappearance, her mother received a phone call. The caller ID flashed with Jenna's number. Her heart raced as she answered, hoping beyond hope that it was her daughter. But all she heard on the other end was static, followed by a faint whisper that sent a chill down her spine. "Help me." The call ended abruptly. When the police traced the number, they found that the call had been made from the old bridge, the same place where Jenna's phone had been found. But no one was there. The case grew colder, but the town of Willow Creek could not shake the feeling that something terrible had taken Jenna, and that it might still be lurking, waiting for its next victim. Years later, the story of Jenna Marshall would become a legend in Willow Creek. A cautionary tale parents told their children to keep them from wandering off at night. But for those who had known her, the horror was all too real. The message on her phone, the eerie clues that surfaced, and the strange sightings all suggested that something far darker than they could imagine had taken hold of their town. And every once in a while, on a quiet night, someone would claim to see a girl standing by the old bridge, her face obscured by shadows, whispering for help, forever lost in the grip of whatever had taken her that fateful night. The Willowbrook Schoolhouse had stood on the outskirts of town for over a century, its faded bricks and broken windows now a ghostly reminder of what it once was. Once, it had been the heart of the community, filled with the sounds of children's laughter and the steady rhythm of chalk scratching across blackboards. But those days were long gone. In 1953, on a stormy autumn evening, a fire tore through the building, claiming the lives of 6 children and their beloved teacher, Miss Eleanor Graves. The fire was swift and brutal, and by the time help arrived, the flames had reduced the schoolhouse to a hollow, charred shell. No one ever figured out what caused it. Since that night, no one in Willowbrook had dared to set foot inside again. The building was left to rot, a dark stain on the town's history, whispered about but never confronted. Over the years, stories began to emerge about strange occurrences at the abandoned schoolhouse. Some said that on quiet nights, if you stood close enough, you could hear the faint sound of a school bell ringing, a bell that had been removed decades ago. Others claimed they'd seen figures moving in the shadows behind the shattered windows, the outlines of children staring out into the distance. Local teenagers turned it into a rite of passage, daring each other to enter the schoolhouse after dark. But those who did rarely made it past the entrance before fleeing in terror, their faces pale, muttering about strange noises or a cold, suffocating presence that seemed to push them out. Despite the rumors, the town had learned to live with the haunted schoolhouse. It was just one of those things, a relic of the past that cast a long shadow but never interfered with daily life. That all changed one October evening when a group of high school friends, Tom, Lisa, Jake, and Emily, decided to test their courage and spend the night inside the schoolhouse. Halloween was approaching, and they wanted to do something thrilling, something to shake up their small-town boredom. The dare was simple: enter the schoolhouse at midnight and stay until dawn. Tom, always the skeptic, insisted the ghost stories were nonsense. Nothing more than old wives' tales meant to scare kids. Lisa and Jake were less sure, but they couldn't back down now without looking like cowards. Emily, the quietest of the group, had been hesitant from the start, feeling an odd, unshakable sense of dread whenever the old building was mentioned. But peer pressure was powerful, and soon the 4 friends found themselves standing before the dark silhouette of the Willowbrook Schoolhouse. The air was thick with fog that night, and the moon was obscured by heavy clouds. The wind whistled through the trees, carrying with it the scent of damp leaves and decay. As they approached the building, the broken windows seemed like black, soulless eyes, watching their every move. Tom, leading the way, pushed open the rusted front door with a loud creak, and they stepped inside. The interior of the schoolhouse was worse than they had imagined. The wooden floorboards groaned under their weight, and the walls were blackened with soot from the fire. Desks were overturned, scattered haphazardly as if left in a rush, and the remains of old textbooks lay in piles of dust and ash. But it wasn't the sight of the destruction that unnerved them. It was the silence. The air inside felt thick, oppressive, as though the building itself was holding its breath, waiting. The group moved cautiously down the main hallway, their flashlights casting long shadows on the walls. They reached the central classroom, the site of the fire, and Tom stopped in front of the old blackboard, now cracked and faded. "This is where it happened," he said, his voice quieter than usual. For a moment they all stood in silence, staring at the blackened floor where, according to town lore, the children's bodies had been found. Then, from the back of the room they heard it, a faint distant sound, a giggle, like a child's laugh, but distorted, as though it was coming from underwater. Lisa's breath caught in her throat, and Jake's flashlight flickered. "Did you guys hear that?" Emily whispered, her eyes wide with fear. Before anyone could answer, the temperature in the room plummeted, The warmth of their breath fogged in the air, and they felt a chill seep into their bones. The wind outside picked up, howling through the broken windows, but within the walls of the schoolhouse, everything was still, too still. Suddenly, the sound of shuffling footsteps echoed from the hallway, growing louder with each second. The four friends froze, their hearts pounding in their chests. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. "Who's there?" Tom called out, trying to keep his voice steady, but there was no response. Instead, the door creaked open slowly, revealing the empty hallway beyond. No one was there. Lisa backed away, her hands trembling. "We need to leave, now!" But before they could move, the blackboard behind them screeched to life. Slowly, as if an invisible hand was dragging a piece of chalk across the surface, words began to appear. "Class is in session." Tom dropped his flashlight and it clattered to the floor. The laughter returned, louder this time, echoing through the room, followed by the unmistakable sound of children running. Tiny footsteps racing up and down the hall. Desks began to rattle, their legs scraping against the floor as though something was pushing them aside. Panic set in. The friends bolted for the door, but it slammed shut before they could reach it. Jake yanked on the handle, but it wouldn't budge. From the back of the room, a shadowy figure emerged, slowly taking shape. It was a woman, tall with long dark hair and a charred, tattered dress. Her eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, and her mouth twisted into a sinister grin. It was Miss Eleanor Graves. She raised her hand, pointing at them, and as she did, the walls of the room seemed to close in, the shadows growing darker and deeper. "No one leaves class early," she whispered, her voice like the rustling of dead leaves. In that moment, the room erupted in chaos. The desks flew across the floor, the windows shattered, and the sound of children screaming filled the air. The friends clawed at the door, desperately trying to escape, but it was no use. The last thing they saw was Miss Graves advancing toward them, her eyes burning with fury, and the faces of the children, pale, ghostly, trapped in time, surrounding them, forever bound to the haunted schoolhouse. The next morning, the townspeople found the schoolhouse just as it had always been, abandoned, empty, and silent. But the four friends were gone, vanished without a trace. Only their bikes remained, parked outside the front door. Inside, on the blackboard, a single message had been left: "Class dismissed." To this day, no one in Willowbrook knows what happened to Tom, Lisa, Jake, and Emily. But the stories of the haunted schoolhouse have only grown darker, and no one dares to approach it anymore. Some say if you listen closely on a stormy night, you can still hear the school bell ringing, calling lost souls to their final eternal class. In the small, secluded town of Cold Hollow, nestled deep within the misty Appalachian Mountains, tales of the enigmatic figure known as Ezra Larin had been passed down through generations. He was a recluse who inhabited a decrepit cabin on the outskirts of town, shunned by the locals and regarded with a mix of curiosity and fear. The townspeople seldom spoke of him, preferring to avoid the subject altogether. Ezra rarely ventured into town, preferring the solitude of his wooded sanctuary, but on the rare occasions when he did, whispers would circulate about the strange man who wore tattered clothes and had wild hair, his eyes glinting with a peculiar intensity. Rumors circulated about his past. Some said he was a wealthy landowner who'd lost everything in a tragic fire, while others claimed he had been a soldier haunted by memories of war. The most sinister rumors suggested that he was a practitioner of dark arts, engaging in forbidden rituals deep within the woods, which might explain the bizarre occurrences that sometimes seemed to emanate from his property. Unexplainable lights flickering in the night sky, and the eerie sounds of chanting that echoed through the trees. As the years passed, these tales turned into urban legends, but they did little to quench the townspeople's morbid curiosity. Children dared each other to approach the old cabin, but none would ever get close enough to knock on the door. The cabin itself was a sight to behold. Covered in vines and moss, it stood as a testament to the passage of time, with its broken windows resembling dark, hollow eyes watching the world pass by. One frigid winter morning, the town awoke to shocking news. Ezra Larin had died. A hunter had stumbled upon his cabin while tracking deer, only to find the old man slumped over in his chair, lifeless and still. With trepidation, a small group of brave souls stepped inside, their breath visible in the cold air. The interior was dimly lit, the only illumination coming from a dusty window that filtered pale light into the room. It was cluttered with an array of odd objects that told the story of a life lived in isolation. Shelves sagged under the weight of tattered books, filled with esoteric symbols and ancient writings, their pages yellowed with age. The walls were adorned with peculiar drawings and strange artifacts, animal bones arranged in disturbing patterns, jars filled with unrecognizable substances, and dark, flickering candles that seemed to have burned down to nothing. The air was thick with an unsettling atmosphere, and as the townspeople cautiously moved further inside, a chill crept down their spines. It was as if the very walls of the cabin were steeped in secrets. As they rummaged through the detritus of Ezra's life, they unearthed a sense of dread that was impossible to ignore. An old dusty trunk caught the attention of one of the men, who pried it open to reveal a collection of journals filled with scrawled notes and erratic drawings. The handwriting was frantic, detailing rituals and incantations that made no sense to the untrained eye. The final entry sent shivers through the group. They must be bound, their souls entwined with the earth, for the pact must be honored. The atmosphere grew thick with unease as the realization sunk in that Ezra had been involved in something far darker than anyone had imagined. But it wasn't until they discovered the trapdoor hidden beneath a tattered rug that the true horror unfolded. Curiosity overtook their fear as they pried it open, revealing a set of creaking wooden stairs that descended into darkness. Against their better judgment, they ventured down into the gloom. The air grew colder and heavier with each step, the walls slick with moisture. When they reached the bottom, the dim light from their flashlights illuminated an underground chamber, and what they found sent their hearts racing. Lining the walls were rows of small, crudely made coffins, each one marked with a name, names of children who had gone missing over the past several decades, children who had vanished without a trace and were long forgotten. The room smelled of damp earth and decay, a sickly sweet odor that clung to their lungs. The realization hit them like a freight train. Ezra had been more than just a hermit. He was a monster who had preyed on the innocent. Panic surged through the group as they turned to flee, but as they did, the air thickened with whispers, ghostly voices echoing through the chamber, calling for help. Suddenly, the lights flickered, plunging them into darkness. The temperature plummeted, and they felt an oppressive force pressing in on them, suffocating and cold. From the shadows emerged a figure, a woman draped in tattered clothing, her features obscured by a veil of darkness. It was as if the very essence of sorrow materialized before them. As she drew closer, they realized she was the spirit of a long-lost child, her face contorted in anguish. "Help us," she wailed, her voice a haunting melody that resonated with their deepest fears. "We are trapped. We need to be free." With a primal instinct to survive, the townspeople surged back toward the stairs, desperately clawing their way up. As they reached the trapdoor, they heard the sounds of children's laughter echoing behind them, a chilling reminder of the lives that had been taken. They scrambled out into the cabin, gasping for air, and bolted for the door, the sunlight blinding after the darkness they had just escaped. Once outside, they regrouped and stumbled into town, shaken and pale, struggling to comprehend what they had uncovered. The community was left in turmoil, wrestling with the horrifying truth about the man they had deemed a harmless hermit. Whispers filled the air, blending with the howling wind that swept through Cold Hollow, carrying tales of the haunted cabin and the spirits of the children who lingered in the shadows. In the weeks that followed, the cabin was left abandoned, a cursed place marked by tragedy. The townspeople made a pact to never return, and they mourned the lost children whose names had been etched into the coffins below. But the memory of Ezra Larin lived on, a dark legacy that would haunt Cold Hollow for generations to come. The townspeople often wondered if the spirits of the lost children had finally found peace, or if they remained trapped, eternally bound to the man who had stolen their lives. And as winter descended upon the mountains, the whispers of those who had vanished echoed through the trees, a chilling reminder that some legends were born from darkness, and the truth could be far more terrifying than any story told around the fire. In the shadowy depths of Blackwood Hollow, where the trees twisted and turned in unnatural ways, lay the crumbling remains of St. Augustine's Church. Built in the late 1800s, the church had once been a beacon of hope and faith, its towering steeple piercing the sky like a finger pointing toward heaven. But as the years wore on, neglect and time transformed it into a decrepit relic, shrouded in mystery and dark rumors. Locals spoke of its sinister past, whispering tales of a congregation that had dabbled in occult rituals, seeking power from forces best left undisturbed. By the late 20th century, the church had become a ghostly shadow of its former self. The once vibrant stained glass windows were now shattered, their colorful pieces lying scattered like forgotten memories. Weeds had reclaimed the once meticulously tended gardens, wrapping around the tombstones that dotted the surrounding cemetery. The air grew thick with the scent of damp earth and decay, casting an oppressive atmosphere over the area. Townsfolk avoided the church, opting instead to take longer routes to avoid passing by its ominous presence. The legends surrounding St. Augustine's Church were as numerous as they were chilling. The most common stories spoke of a dark ritual performed by the congregation on the night of the summer solstice, a ceremony said to have gone horribly wrong. According to local lore, the congregation had attempted to summon a being from another realm, but instead unleashed a malevolent spirit that had taken hold of the church, trapping the souls of its congregation within its walls. Those who had ventured too close to the church at night claimed to hear the echo of chanting on the wind, a haunting sound that sent shivers down their spines. Despite the tales, or perhaps because of them, a group of curious teenagers decided to explore the old church one fateful summer evening. Sarah, the fearless leader of the group, was determined to uncover the truth behind the legends. Her friends, Tom, Lisa, and Jake, were equally intrigued, but a touch more hesitant. They had all heard the stories, but the thrill of adventure outweighed their fears. Armed with flashlights and a camcorder to document their escapades, they set out toward the church just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the ground. The walk to St. Augustine's was filled with nervous laughter and banter, but as they approached, a heavy silence fell over the group. The church loomed before them, its silhouette dark against the dimming sky. "We can't turn back now," Sarah insisted, her determination shining in her eyes. "We're here, and we need to know if the stories are true." As they stepped through the old wooden door, it creaked ominously, the sound echoing through the empty space. Dust motes danced in the beams of their flashlights, and the air felt stale and heavy, as if the church were holding its breath. The interior was dimly lit, with only a few rays of moonlight filtering through the broken windows. The pews were in disarray, some overturned, others rotten and crumbling. The altar, once a place of reverence, now stood in disrepair, covered in a thick layer of dust. "Look at this place," Tom said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's like a scene from a horror movie." "Let's check the basement," Jake suggested, his curiosity piqued. "That's where all the creepy stuff happens, right?" As they made their way through the church, they stumbled upon a trapdoor at the back of the altar. It was old and weathered, with rusted hinges that creaked ominously as they pried it open. The darkness below beckoned, and without a second thought, Sarah led the way down the narrow staircase. The basement was a stark contrast to the church above. The air was cold and damp, and the smell of mildew filled their nostrils. As they reached the bottom, they shone their flashlights around the room. The stone walls were adorned with strange symbols etched into the surface, and the floor was littered with remnants of old candles and burnt offerings. A large stone altar dominated the center of the room, stained dark with what looked like dried blood. "Wow, this is insane," Lisa exclaimed, stepping cautiously forward. "What do you think they did down here?" "Probably some kind of weird cult stuff," Tom replied, his voice shaking slightly. "Let's just make sure we don't touch anything." Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted. A chill swept through the room, causing the hairs on the back of their necks to stand on end. The air felt charged, as if something was watching them. Sarah turned to her friends, her expression serious. "Do you guys feel that? It's like something's here." Before anyone could respond, a soft whisper filled the air, barely audible but unmistakable. "Join us." The voice seemed to echo off the stone walls, sending a shiver down their spines. "What was that?" Jake stammered, his eyes wide with fear. "I don't know," Sarah said, her heart racing, "but we should probably get out of here." As they turned to leave, the basement door slammed shut with a deafening bang, trapping them in darkness. Panic surged through the group as they banged on the door, desperate to escape. "Let us out," Tom shouted, his voice breaking. The chanting began then, soft at first but growing louder, filling the room with an otherworldly sound. Shadows flickered in the corners of their flashlights, darting just out of sight. The temperature dropped further, their breath fogging in the frigid air. In a moment of desperation, Sarah grabbed the flashlight and shone it around the room, her heart pounding as the beam caught sight of the altar. To her horror, she saw movement, a dark figure materializing above the stone surface. It was cloaked in shadow, with no discernible features, but the energy it radiated was palpable. "Join us," the voice repeated, now clearer, as if many spirits were speaking in unison. "You are chosen." With a surge of adrenaline, Sarah hurled herself at the door, slamming her shoulder against it with all her might. The others joined in, pushing against the heavy wood, until finally, with a loud creak, the door swung open. They stumbled back into the church, gasping for air, their hearts racing. Without looking back, they sprinted through the main hall and out into the night, the cold air hitting their faces like a slap. Once outside, they collapsed onto the ground, panting and terrified. "What just happened?" Lisa gasped, her eyes wide with shock. "I don't know," Sarah said, shaking. "But we have to tell someone." The group hurried back to town, the moonlight illuminating their path as they recounted their harrowing experience. As they reached the safety of their homes, they struggled to shake off the feeling of dread that clung to them. Over the next few weeks, the events of that night replayed in their minds, a haunting reminder of what lay beneath the surface of St. Augustine's Church. They avoided the area, but curiosity gnawed at them, urging them to uncover the truth behind the sinister legends. One evening, as they gathered at Sarah's house, the conversation inevitably drifted back to the church. "What if we went back?" Jake suggested hesitantly. "Maybe we could find out what's really going on down there." "I don't know," Lisa replied, biting her lip. "What if it's even worse than before?" "We can't just let it go," Sarah insisted. "We need to understand what we're dealing with. If there are spirits trapped down there, maybe we can help them." After much debate, they finally agreed to return to St. Augustine's, this time prepared with supplies, a Ouija board, candles, and a plan. They would conduct a seance in hopes of communicating with the spirits that haunted the church, hoping to uncover the truth about the dark rituals that had taken place there. On the appointed night, they gathered their gear and made their way back to the church, their hearts pounding with a mix of excitement and fear. The air felt heavy as they approached the dilapidated structure, and the moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the scene. Inside, they set up the Ouija board on the altar, lighting candles around it to create a circle of flickering light. The shadows danced on the walls as they settled down, their nerves palpable. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "If there are any spirits here, we invite you to communicate with us. Please, we want to help." The planchette sat motionless on the board, and for a moment, nothing happened. The silence was deafening, each tick of the clock echoing in their ears. Just when they began to doubt their decision, the planchette began to move. "Are you there?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "Yes," it spelled out slowly, letters forming beneath their fingers. "What do you want?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Free," it replied, and a chill swept through the room, extinguishing one of the candles. "Free from what?" Lisa asked, her heart racing. "Binding," the planchette spelled, moving erratically now, as if desperate to convey a message. "Trapped souls." The temperature in the room dropped suddenly, and they could see their breath fogging in the air. Shadows flickered around them, and the chanting returned, filling their ears with a haunting melody. "Stop!" Sarah shouted, her heart pounding. "Please, we want to help you. Help us!" The planchette moved again, the force behind it growing stronger. "Ritual needs to end." "What ritual?" Tom asked, panic rising in his chest. "Sacrifice," it spelled, the letters shaky and erratic. "Church must be cleansed." As the words settled in their minds, a deafening roar echoed through the church, shaking the very foundations of the building. The candles flickered violently, and the room seemed to close in around them. "Run!" Sarah yelled, and they bolted from the altar, scrambling up the staircase. Just as they reached the door, it slammed shut, and they were thrown back against the wall. The shadows surged around them, twisting and curling like angry serpents. "You cannot leave!" a voice boomed, deep and resonant, echoing through the church. Fear coursed through them as they fought against the unseen force holding them captive. "We have to break the binding," Sarah cried out, desperately trying to remember what she had read about releasing trapped spirits. "Light!" Jake shouted, fumbling to relight the extinguished candles. As the flame flickered to life, the shadows shrieked, recoiling from the light. "We need more light!" The group scrambled to gather the candles, lighting them one by one. The room brightened, and as the shadows faded, the chanting grew softer, more distant. "Please let us go," Lisa pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "We want to help you." In that moment, the air shifted. The oppressive force that had held them captive began to weaken. The shadows receded, and the door creaked open, offering a path to freedom. They rushed outside, gasping for breath, and the night air enveloped them like a protective blanket. Behind them, the church loomed, its silhouette dark against the stars, but the malevolent presence that had once permeated the air seemed to have lifted. Exhausted and shaken, they collapsed onto the ground, the weight of their experience settling heavily on their shoulders. "What just happened?" Tom panted, trying to catch his breath. "I think we did something," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "We broke the binding." "Do you think the spirits are finally free?" Lisa asked, her eyes wide with disbelief. "I hope so," Sarah replied, looking back at the church, now silent and still. "But we need to tell everyone. They need to know what really happened here." In the days that followed, the group shared their story with the townsfolk, and while some were skeptical, others were moved by their account. The church became a symbol of hope rather than fear, a place where the lost souls had found peace. The local authorities were persuaded to take action, and soon, a group of volunteers came together to restore St. Augustine's, cleaning the grounds and restoring its former glory. As the church was brought back to life, the stories of its dark past faded, replaced by tales of redemption and healing. The congregation, once feared and shunned, became a community focused on hope and renewal. People from neighboring towns began to visit, drawn by the stories of the brave teenagers who had freed the spirits of St. Augustine's. Though the church had been cleansed of its dark past, the memories of that fateful night lingered in Sarah, Tom, Lisa, and Jake. They had confronted the shadows of the past and emerged stronger, forever changed by their experience. They often returned to the church, not out of fear, but to celebrate the lives that had once been lost and the hope that had been restored. In time, St. Augustine's became a place where stories were shared, where the community gathered to honor the past while looking toward the future. The legend of the sinister church had transformed, a reminder of the power of friendship, courage, and the unyielding strength of the human spirit. Years later, as they stood together at the altar, now vibrant with fresh flowers and flickering candles, Sarah smiled at her friends. "We did it," she said softly. "We turned fear into hope." And as the sun set behind the trees, casting a warm glow over Blackwood Hollow, the echoes of the past became a gentle whisper, a testament to the resilience of the human heart and the bonds that could withstand even the darkest of nights. In the quaint town of Maplewood, nestled among rolling hills and lush forests, life had always been peaceful. Children played in the streets, neighbors exchanged pleasantries, and pets roamed freely, a testament to the tight-knit community spirit. However, as the summer sun began to set, an unsettling cloud loomed over the town, a series of mysterious pet disappearances that left the residents in a state of anxiety and fear. It started slowly, with one family reporting their beloved golden retriever Max missing after he wandered out into the backyard one sunny afternoon. At first, it was brushed off as a simple case of a dog getting lost, but when Max failed to return home for days, worry set in. Within a week, more reports poured in. Cats, dogs, even rabbits vanished without a trace. The town was gripped by what quickly became known as The missing pets epidemic. Families posted flyers and scoured the neighborhood, calling out the names of their lost companions. Social media buzzed with frantic messages and shared posts, urging residents to keep a close watch on their pets. The Maplewood Pet Rescue Association organized search parties, combing through parks and wooded areas, but each effort ended in disappointment. With every passing day, more pets vanished, and more families felt the weight of despair. Amid the chaos, a local girl named Emma became particularly invested in the search. A bright-eyed 12-year-old with a heart full of compassion, Emma had a soft spot for animals. Her own cat, Whiskers, had gone missing just days after the epidemic began. Determined to find Whiskers and the other missing pets, Emma decided to investigate the disappearances herself. Armed with a notebook, a flashlight, and an unwavering sense of resolve, she set out to uncover the truth. Emma began her quest at the local animal shelter, where she spoke to the staff about the disappearances. "Do you think someone could be taking them?" she asked, her voice quivering slightly. The shelter director, a kind woman named Mrs. Harper, sighed deeply. "It's possible. We've had an influx of stray animals since the epidemic began, and many seem to be in poor health. It's as if they've been abandoned or neglected." Intrigued by this new information, Emma asked if there had been any unusual sightings reported around the time the pets went missing. Mrs. Harper nodded slowly. There were a few reports of a suspicious van seen lurking around the neighborhood, dark blue, old with tinted windows. But we haven't been able to catch anyone. Determined to follow this lead, Emma enlisted the help of her best friend, Leo. A tech-savvy boy with a knack for gadgets, Leo was thrilled to assist Emma on her mission. They spent the next few days gathering information, interviewing neighbors, and digging through social media posts. They created a timeline of the disappearances and marked locations on a map, hoping to find a pattern. As they pieced together the puzzle, they began to notice something strange. The pets that went missing tended to disappear in clusters, often after dark. The final straw came one evening when Emma discovered that the last known sighting of her cat, Whiskers, coincided with a report of a suspicious van parked near her home. That night, fueled by determination and a sense of urgency, Emma and Leo decided to stake out the neighborhood. They equipped themselves with snacks, flashlights, and a walkie-talkie, positioning themselves strategically near the area where Whiskers had disappeared. As they sat quietly in the darkness, the silence was deafening, broken only by the distant chirping of crickets. Hours passed, and just as their spirits began to wane, a shadowy figure appeared in the distance, accompanied by the unmistakable sound of a van engine. Emma's heart raced as she recognized the dark blue vehicle, its engine rumbling ominously as it parked along the curb. "That's it," she whispered excitedly, nudging Leo. As they watched, a tall figure emerged from the van, a hood obscuring their face. The person moved quickly, scanning the area before heading toward a nearby backyard. Emma and Leo exchanged nervous glances. "Should we follow?" Leo asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Emma replied, adrenaline pumping through her veins. They crept quietly across the yard, careful to stay hidden behind bushes and trees. As they approached the figure, they noticed a small, wriggling bundle in their arms, what looked like a terrified little dog. Emma's heart sank. This was the evidence they had been searching for. Just as she was about to reach for her phone to call for help, the figure turned sharply, revealing a face partially hidden by shadows. Emma gasped as she recognized him. It was Mr. Collins, an older man from their neighborhood, known for his eccentric behavior and reclusive nature. "Mr. Collins?" she called out, her voice trembling. He froze, the dog in his arms whimpering softly. "What are you kids doing here?" he snapped, his tone harsh and defensive. "We know about the missing pets," Emma said, her voice steady despite the fear rising within her. "You've taken them, haven't you?" Mr. Collins's expression darkened, and he took a step back, holding the dog closer to him. "You don't know what you're talking about," he hissed. "You need to leave." Leo, standing beside Emma, quickly took a step forward. "We're not going anywhere until you tell us the truth." With that, Mr. Collins turned and bolted toward the van, clutching the dog tightly. Emma and Leo raced after him, their hearts pounding as they reached the vehicle just as he was about to open the door. "Stop!" Emma yelled, reaching out to grab his arm. With a sudden movement, Mr. Collins swung around, causing Emma to stumble back. "You don't understand," he shouted, desperation etched on his face. "I'm trying to save them." "Save them?" Leo questioned, bewildered. "From what?" With a trembling voice, Mr. Collins began to explain. "There's a group in this town, people who are not what they seem. They capture pets for sinister purposes. I've been trying to protect the animals by taking them before they can be harmed. I thought I could keep them safe." Emma's heart raced as she processed his words. "But you can't just take them. You're making it worse." The old man's face crumpled and he dropped to his knees, the little dog whimpering in his arms. "I didn't know what else to do," he sobbed. "I didn't want to see them hurt. I thought if I could just hide them, keep them safe, maybe I could figure something out." Emma and Leo exchanged glances, a mix of empathy and disbelief flooding their hearts. They had found the missing pet's captor, but the story was far more complicated than they had imagined. With the situation growing more intense, Emma took a deep breath and spoke gently. "We can help you, Mr. Collins, but we need to work together. We need to figure out who's really behind this and stop them." He looked up at them, tears in his eyes. "You'd help me, even after everything?" "Of course," Emma said, her voice steady. "We all love our pets. Let's save them together." Over the next few days, the trio worked tirelessly, uncovering the dark underbelly of Maplewood. They learned that a small but organized group of residents had been capturing pets for illegal dogfighting rings and underground breeding operations. Armed with this knowledge, Emma, Leo, and Mr. Collins devised a plan to expose the group and rescue the missing pets. They gathered evidence, documenting the locations of suspicious activities and collecting testimonies from families whose pets had vanished. With the help of the Maplewood Pet Rescue Association, they organized a community meeting, presenting their findings to the town. As Emma stood before her neighbors, fear and determination coursed through her. "We can't let this continue," she said, her voice ringing with conviction. "These people are preying on our beloved pets, and we need to stand together to protect them. We need to take action." The community rallied behind Emma's words, and soon they had a plan. Local authorities were notified, and a sting operation was set in motion to catch the culprits in the act. Emma, Leo, and Mr. Collins worked alongside law enforcement, providing crucial information that led to a series of raids on suspected properties. The night of the operation arrived, and tension hung thick in the air. Emma and Leo watched anxiously as officers surrounded a run-down building on the outskirts of town, where it was believed many of the stolen pets were being held. With their hearts pounding, they held their breath, waiting for the signal that the operation had begun. Moments later, a flash of lights and the sound of shouting filled the air. Officers stormed the building, and within minutes, the first wave of rescued pets emerged, trembling but alive. Emma's heart swelled with hope as she saw dogs and cats being cradled in the arms of their owners, tears of joy streaming down their faces. As the operation continued, the town came alive with excitement and relief. In the aftermath, the community banded together to care for the rescued pets, providing them with love and attention. Mr. Collins, once seen as an outcast, became a local hero, his actions finally understood. He was invited to help care for the animals at the shelter, where his knowledge of animal care proved invaluable. As summer turned to fall, the town of Maplewood began to heal from the ordeal. The missing pets epidemic became a tale of resilience and community strength. Emma and Leo continued to advocate for animal safety, raising awareness about responsible pet ownership and the importance of community vigilance. The bond between the residents grew stronger, united by a shared purpose and a newfound commitment to protect their furry companions. The dark chapter in Maplewood's history transformed into a legacy of hope and compassion, proving that even in the face of darkness, light could emerge when people stood together. Years later, as Emma walked through the park with Whiskers happily trotting by her side, she smiled at the vibrant community around her. Maplewood was once again a place of laughter, joy, and love, a place where every pet had a home and every resident looked out for one another. And in that spirit of unity, the memory of the missing pets epidemic became a powerful reminder of the strength found in community, compassion, and the unbreakable bond between humans and their beloved pets. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe.